So the Nintendo Switch 2 has been out for a while now, and a lot of people already have the system as it's basically had the fastest launch of any video game system in history, so it's been very successful so far, and a lot of people already have it, but there is of course a bunch of people who don't have a Nintendo Switch 2 yet either, for many reasons including that they can't afford it, or maybe they're still happy with their current Switch, or they don't see any games that they really have that convince them to buy it yet, so they're just kind of waiting. But there is also a group of people who don't get any new system when it comes out immediately because they would rather get the revision of the system that comes out later. Now, this is something we pretty much see all the time now when it comes to video game hardware, where you release like a brand new system and then a few years later you have like a revised version of it or a refresh where you have some better changes and a couple of little tweaks, but you re-release it and you'll have some people who will double dip and buy it again, but there's also going to be people who never bought it the first time and are more interested now in getting it again. So we see that now with like the PlayStation, where you have like the PS5 Pro, where it's more powerful, it can do some better features with like upscaling and stuff. So some people would rather just not get a PS5 and go immediately to that. Nintendo has of course done it for a long time with like the DS's, where you had like the normal DS and then the DS Lite and then the DSi, DSi XL, tons of different DS's. You had that with the 3DS as well, where you had like the normal 3DS, the 2DS, the new Nintendo 3DS. Like there's been so many versions of that. And of course we also had that most recently with the Nintendo Switch, where we have 3 different versions of that, where you had the standard Nintendo Switch, which released in 2017, then you had the Nintendo Switch Lite, and you had the Nintendo Switch OLED model. And so it doesn't take a genius to guess that we're probably going to get some other models for the Nintendo Switch 2 as well, but it seems like we might have already gotten our first little hint that something is going to be coming maybe relatively soon. Now this is all coming from this person's Sky, so if we take a look right here, it says, "I think I've discovered something interesting, but I have no idea what it implies. On Nintendo's account portal, there's an unused model code under the name OSM. The Switch 2's model code is B or BEE. The portal has images for each Switch model, and requesting OSM returns an image of a Switch 2. So basically on Nintendo's account portal, the acronym that we use for the current Nintendo Switch 2 is BEE, but for some reason there's another one that you can also access called OSM, which still gives you another image of a Nintendo Switch 2. So a lot of people think this could be referring to maybe another model for the Switch 2, as we did get to see different codes like this with the original Switch as well, where you had like the original Switch when it first came out, which was HAC, and then you also had other ones like HAD, HDH, and HEG, which were referring to some of the ones like the Redbox updated Switch that came out in 2019. You also had the Switch Lite, and then the Nintendo Switch OLED model. So then of course the speculation now becomes, well, what could this new model for the Nintendo Switch 2 be like? And I feel like there's really only 2 directions if we go by what Nintendo has done before, which is the first option is they're gonna make a Nintendo Switch 2 Lite, and then the other option is they're gonna make a Nintendo Switch 2 OLED. Now the original Switch came out in 2017, but Nintendo introduced the Nintendo Switch Lite in 2019, just 2 years after it had released, so if we kind of go by the same logic, it would mean that with the Nintendo Switch 2's release in 2025, potentially maybe there could be like a Nintendo Switch 2 Lite by next year at some point in 2027, though if you guys want my honest thoughts, I actually don't know if we're gonna see a Nintendo Switch 2 Lite, because I just feel like with the Switch 2, it might be a little bit more difficult for them to try to get this into a smaller form factor. I mean, I don't know, I feel like maybe a Switch 2 Lite might just be like the size of like an original Switch, because I don't really know how they could make it like very small like how the actual Switch Lite was, but maybe they can. And I also just feel like with the tech that they're putting into it, with like the Nvidia chips and the RAM and like the really fast SSD storage and stuff like that, I don't know if they're gonna be able to figure out a way to get all of that and keep the exact same performance but in a smaller form factor like what they did with the Switch Lite. Maybe they can still figure it out, but also the price of everything right now is so high too, so that's also another thing, is like maybe like the time that the next new model comes out for the Switch 2 could even be more delayed, just for the fact that like everything is so expensive now when it comes to like RAM and memory and all these components. So maybe Nintendo might not even do that right away, like how the Switch Lite came out just 2 years after the original Switch. And then of course you have the other possibility where this could be a Switch 2 OLED model, and if that's the case, I wonder when exactly this would release too, because the original Switch came out in 2017, but the OLED model came out in 2021, and it seemed like even that they were trying to get it out earlier, but because of like COVID and all of the chip shortages and everything that was happening, they had to kind of just wait until they were able to release that, and even that, it seemed like they were trying to make it have more capabilities than what it was actually released as, but they had to just release it with like a bigger screen and all of that as like the OLED model. So with the chip shortage and everything happening then, it was pretty rough for them, but now you've got like the price of RAM and the memory and everything, so I don't know if Nintendo would still have a brand new model of the Switch 2 come out like right away, or if they would wait a little bit longer. But I do think nevertheless it is going to happen. Like, we're definitely still going to get Switch 2 models that are going to be different, because it makes them a lot of money, because there are going to be people who will double dip and buy other models, but also just people who didn't get a Switch 2 right away, who are just going to be using these new models as a way to get into the Switch 2 ecosystem. Also, when the Switch 1 OLED came out, they made the screen bigger than the original system when it released, but I don't know if they would try to do something like that again with a Switch 2 OLED, because the Switch 2 screen right now is already really big. It's an 8-inch screen. It's already bigger than the Switch 1 OLED, so if they try to make that even bigger and try to say like it's a 9-inch screen or something, I feel like at that point it's just going to get really big for your hand, so I don't know if they would really try to do that. Maybe they could just kind of stretch out the screen a little bit more so that they can kind of have like lesser noticeable bezels, because that is kind of one thing that some people still kind of complain about with like the black borders that are around the Switch 2 screen. So maybe they could do that, but I feel like that still wouldn't feel like a big upgrade. Like if you go from just a Switch 2 to then having a Switch 2 OLED where you have really thin bezels around it and you don't really notice like any borders, I just feel like that's not going to feel like a big difference compared to like going from like an original Switch to a Switch 1 OLED, where you actually see like I think it was like 1 or 2 inches that the screen got bigger. So I don't know if they would do something like that. Maybe they could just do some other improvements like the battery life. I know when the original Switch came out, the battery life was pretty bad. You were only getting like 2 or 2.5 hours, pretty much the exact same as like the Switch 2 model that we have right now. But then when we got the Switch 1 OLED, you were able to play like Breath of the Wild for 6 hours in handheld mode, and it was really nice. The battery life was drastically improved, so if we get a Switch 2 OLED where the battery life is going to be much better, I know for a lot of people who do play in portable mode mostly, that's going to be a pretty big reason for them to get it. And then maybe they could also improve some of the other things. Like I know right now a lot of people don't like the HDR that's on the Switch 2 itself, because the tablet doesn't really have the best screen, so you don't really get like the beautiful like spectral highlights and the really deep dark blacks and stuff. So maybe they could make that better with an OLED screen and have way better HDR on the tablet itself. So tweaks like that I feel like could make a Switch 2 OLED model seem much more enticing. Now personally for me, I don't know if I would get any type of brand new Switch 2 model. I think really the only thing that would convince me to get one is if they somehow improve like the power and the performance of the system in like docked mode, where you get maybe better upscaling or better HDR or visuals on the TV itself. That's probably what would get me to cave. But if it's just going to be like better battery life for the tablet and the screen on the tablet becomes OLED and you have better speakers and stuff, I probably will skip out on that, because I've said it before, but I pretty much play my Switch 90% in docked mode, so I don't really need to have like the best possible experience in portable mode with like the best battery life or the best screen when it comes to that type of stuff. And I have an OLED TV that I play it on, so I essentially have a Switch 2 OLED already, so I don't really see any reason to get any type of revision, unless, like I said, they improve the experience of docked mode itself too, and you get better performance. So maybe if they do like a slightly more powerful Switch 2 or like a Switch 2 Pro, then yeah, that's probably what will get me to cave. But yeah, there you go guys, that is pretty much all the information that we have right now about a brand new Switch 2 model potentially already being in the works. I guess it shouldn't surprise anyone, because we are expecting more models of the Switch 2 like Nintendo has historically done for so many systems in the past. It really just is a matter of when, and if they're gonna do it pretty soon, like just 2 years later, like what they did with the Switch Lite when that came out in 2019, or because of everything happening, if Nintendo is gonna wait a little bit longer. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But yeah, if you guys enjoyed the video, definitely be sure to click that like button and also subscribe to the channel as well. I'm definitely gonna have some more videos talking about Nintendo, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on that. Comment down below and let me know what you think about all of this. Are you somebody who is waiting to get like the revision or a refreshed version of the Switch 2? Do you want it to be a Switch 2 Lite, or would you rather have like a more powerful Switch 2 Pro or like a Switch 2 OLED? What would you like to see for a new model and some of the improvements? Definitely be sure to comment down below and let me know. But if you don't have anything to say, just comment your favorite emoji down below for some engagement. I would really appreciate it. Go follow me on Twitter at Aero so you can be featured in videos, and also join my Discord server as well. We've got a bunch of people in there who are always talking about Pokemon and Smash Bros and Nintendo, so definitely be sure to join that. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for watching.